Mr. O'Toole found himself in a serious controversy about offensive remarks he made on video about residential schools. He's just been forced to backtrack on those. This video was posted to the Ryerson Conservatives Facebook page on November 5th. It was first published by Press Progress, and it shows Mr. O'Toole commenting on residential schools in a way that factually contradicts the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I want to play you part of it. Here it is.
So let's learn from the bad mistakes and in some case tragic circumstances of our past. But when Egerton Ryerson was called in by Hector Langevin and people, it was meant to try and provide education. It became a horrible program that really harmed people. We have to learn from that. And I wear orange and I do that, but we're not helping anyone by misrepresenting the past. By the time Pierre Trudeau opened those schools, it was 100 years after we knew the program was a disaster.
Okay, so those comments outraged people because Hector Langevin and Egerton Ryerson, who Ryerson University is named after, did not start the program to, quote, educate people, as everyone knows. It was to eradicate Indigenous culture. It's been called a cultural genocide. Many MPs, many Indigenous leaders, like the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations, said not only is it factually wrong, but now Mr. O'Toole has been forced to backtrack. He sent this statement to CTV News saying the very existence of residential school is a terrible stain on Canada's history that has had sweeping impacts on generations of Indigenous Canadians. I speak about the harm caused by residential schools regularly, he writes. In my comments to Ryerson students, I said the residential school system was intended to try to, quote, provide education. It was not. The system was intended to remove children from their influences of their homes, families, and traditions and cultures. So he's clearly backtracked. Where does that leave Mr. O'Toole? He had once said when he became leader, he will have a serious approach to reconciliation. What does this tell us? Let's bring the press gallery to discuss that. Steph Levitz is a reporter with the Canadian Press. Robert Benzie is the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief. Pam Palmater, a Mi'kmaq lawyer and the chair of Indigenous governance, by the way, at Ryerson University. And Jenni Byrne, CEO of Jenni, Byrne and Associates, the former campaign manager and deputy chief of staff to Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Welcome all. Great to have you here. I'm going to start with you, Pam Palmater, because you've called for Erin O'Toole to resign over these. Now you've seen his backtracking. What do you make of the comments and what he actually said?
Well, this is standard conservative playbook. I mean, this over time, every time we talk about residential schools, you've got a prominent conservative person coming out and denying that there was a problem, making racist comments, and then apologizing afterwards. The damage is done. The damage was done back in November, and he didn't even walk back all of his comments. I mean, the rest of his comments, he hasn't walked back yet. And more importantly, he hasn't apologized to the survivors of residential schools for the harm he caused in trying to belittle or minimize what actually happened, what the actual intention of those policymakers were, which we know now from the TRC and the National Inquiry were genocidal intentions.
So we did invite Mr. O'Toole onto the program. He was not available, Jenni Byrne. I mean, you know, Stephen Harper apologized and issued the apology on this. You know, I understand that he's backtracked now, but why is he saying this stuff behind closed doors? What's your take on this, Jenni Byrne?
Well, listen, as you said, Stephen Harper, I don't think this is a partisan issue. Stephen Harper, I was very proud to be working for him when he apologized for the horror that was residential schools. He said in the House of Commons that it was something what residential schools was to basically take people out of to take children out of their culture and assimilate them into basically into the white culture. And he, you know, I believe it was a politician at the time that said, "Kill the Indian within the child," and he apologized for that. And I don't think it's a partisan thing, and I think that it's very good that Erin apologized for the comments that he made on the Zoom call with the kids from Ryerson.
Right. I just want to be fair, Steph. He didn't actually apologize. He backtracked, but he didn't apologize. Steph, what do you make of these and the impact of these?
Well, let's look at it from two perspectives. Let's look at the context of the conversation he was having and this issue of cancel culture. which has been, a big part of his, I don't know, political messaging, let's say, as part of his leadership campaign. Even prior to his leadership campaign, he's been very outspoken on this idea of erasing history, saying we must learn from history, we must acknowledge the wrongs of history. And maybe in this instance, he's a classic example of someone who has failed to learn the lessons of history. When you say I wear orange, what is that? Well, that's nice, you wear orange, but at the same time, you still seem to believe, this myth about residential schools. And he has a tension there, right? He has a tension among his base, among the people who have their backup about what they call this so-called cancel culture, that you can't, have had a position in the past. And there was some irony in that, of course, today, right? Because what's happening? People are saying, cancel Erin O'Toole, tell him to stop talking, tell him to resign. There's some irony there, and that he had to face up to the fact that sometimes people say things and they're wrong, and he should admit they're wrong. And you know what? He shouldn't have to say it through a spokesperson. This is a guy who is all over social media 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Put out a video, own it, and move, show that you can move on with this.
Robert Benzie, what do you make of this? One thing, we didn't play these clips. He was contrasting conservatives' approach to residential schools, and he did talk about the Stephen Harper apology, with liberals. I'd just like to say, no government, conservative, liberal, is covered in any glory in this. This is a stain on every government. So, playing politics of who is better on residential schools is a bit stunning to me. What do you make of this, and maybe the political consequences of this, Benz?
Yeah, exactly, Evan. And I think the problem, this was a hugely problematic thing that happened, and Mr. O'Toole has egg on his face for it, and then some. And I think it was like he was trying to score a partisan point with young Tories by saying, look, the Liberals were even worse than we were. And maybe they were. But the thing is, both parties that were in government for the first 100 and whatever years of the country, when residential schools were alive and kicking, did a terrible thing. I mean, and there's no glory to be wrapped in this. I think the problem for Mr. O'Toole moving forward is one of the reasons Tories got a new leader after Andrew Scheer is they didn't want another Gaffmeister. They didn't want someone who was prone to self-inflicted wounds. And here it is. It's not like, okay, Erin O'Toole isn't secretly American. At least there's that, and at least we know he is a lawyer, not a sort of insurance broker, maybe possibly. But I think this is kind of the kind of situation that's going to leave Tories a bit concerned about who their new leader is. I mean, I think it is problematic, and I think that he can recover from it. I think, but it's going to take some doing on his part.
Yeah, I'll swing back to Pam, not only on this issue, but on others. I mean, every political party, we're heading into an election. Is that the kind of thing that could, he's now walked it back, or he's tried to, Pam Palmater. Does this kind of thing haunt Erin O'Toole, or can he move beyond it when he says, I've spoken a lot about the horrors of the residential school?
I think it is going to haunt him, because what it does negatively for the Conservative Party is point all eyes back to, oh, yes, we remember when Conservative MP Pierre Poilievre on the day of the apology said, we're not getting good value for money by compensating these victims. And also remembering when Conservative Minister of Aboriginal Affairs John Duncan said, oh, this was just a good education policy gone wrong, and so on and so on. And Conservative Senator Lynn Bayek saying, oh, residential schools were great. So what happens is this isn't just about him now. This is all eyes back on the Conservatives and how this is a recurring theme in the Conservative Party. And unless he and the party are able in the new year to say, no, we've distanced ourselves from that, we don't hold those beliefs, right, it's going to be a problem going forward.